The Pattaya City Expats Club is a non-profit social organisation and our speakers are volunteers. The club as such assumes no responsibility or liability for the professional reputation of or the quality of services provided by the speaker today.
Anyway, I put this particular map there to give you some sort of flavour of where everything is. I mean, a lot of people who live in Thailand believe that the border is actually contiguous with the northern part of Thailand, i.e. across there. But as you see, Myanmar goes a long way up there and a long way down here. A couple of things I want you to notice. One of them is the size of Bangladesh, and that is quite important, the actual size. There's something like 180 million people or something actually living there. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's a huge number of people there, okay, in Bangladesh, in a very small area. The other thing I want you to notice is Vietnam and Laos, okay? The reason is Myanmar is between those two and India, okay? Those are things to notice. Vietnam and Laos were French Indochina, as you can remember. Okay, India up there, that is Assam. Assam is where the tea comes from, okay? So I just want you to remember those things because they will become relevant. Okay, these are the states. Not all of them because I couldn't get them on the map. Okay, we start with Kachin at the top. Kachin is where the communists fled to after they were forced out by the Myanmar army, okay? So there's pretty communist type setup up there, okay? The next one is Shan. Shan State, as Rose knows. That's probably the saddest state of them all, okay? The second saddest is Rakhine, that one. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so these are the states. Okay, let me give you a little bit of a potted history here. Originally, in this area, the Karen came here first, okay? They were from northwest China, from around the Gobi. They were forced out by the desert. This is all part of their folklore. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it's all part of their folklore, part of their history. They came down to Thailand and they came down to Myanmar and they settled in the hills and they settled in this area, basically. Okay? And also in Thailand itself. There's quite a lot of Karen in Thailand itself. They were followed a few years later by the Burmans. Now, the Burmans came from here, or in there, sorry. They came from Nepal, okay? So the Karen came via Tibet down to Thailand and Burma, and the Burmans, or Barmas, came from Nepal. Now, if you think about Nepal, you think about the Gurkhas, etc. These are the guys they are. They're tough. The Burmans are very tough fighters, okay? They set up their kingdom in the middle, all along the Irrawaddy, which is right up the middle of the country, effectively. And they started expanding. They took Rakhine State. Rakhine was called the Arakan at that time, and it was a sultanate. It was a Muslim sultanate, but 90% of the population were actually Buddhists. And they were quite happy with that, by the way, that the Muslims ran the country and the Buddhists lived in the country. And they were quite happy with that. Well, anyway, they got taken by the Burmans. Chin, which is basically part of it, also got taken, okay? So they're expanding out. Where they made the mistake was they attacked Assam. They attacked India. And the British declared war on them. That was the first Anglo-Burmese war. Okay. Up against the British Army, which had superior artillery, etc., they lost. They lost for various reasons. One is they attacked here directly into the British Army, into the British guns. And secondly, the British came up here. Okay, so they sent an expedition up the Irrawaddy, and they took their bases of the Burmese army actually in the central part of Burma. So, as part of the reparations for that, okay, because they lost, part of the reparations for that was the Arakan was handed over to, you're not going to believe this, the East India Company. So the British government, the British taxpayer paid for the war, the private elites got the money, basically. Okay, the Arakan was turned into the rice bowl of Asia. Okay, they completely, they chopped a lot of the jungle down, planted rice paddies. At one point in the late 1800s, it was the biggest rice producer in the world, the Arakan. Okay. What they needed, though, was huge amounts of labor to do that. And so what they did was they brought laborers in from Calcutta, from the slums of Calcutta. They brought them in, this is British, brought them into Arakan in order to work the fields. So they said, well, look, we'll give you somewhere to live, we'll give you a bowl of rice a day, a nice healthy atmosphere, off you go. Compared to living in the slums of Calcutta, it was paradise. And so huge amounts of people flooded into Arakan to actually cultivate the rice. Those people later on became known as the Rohingya. Okay, so that's where the Rohingya came from. Okay, people of Arakan were not very happy about that. Okay, but there was nothing they could do. Anyway, later on, the French, who we had a beef with at the time, they were the other superpower, they started using the ports in southern Burma. So the British said, well, we need to go to war with Burma. Now, the first war, we took so much money in terms of reparations, we absolutely bankrupted the country. It was poor, 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 okay? Because we sucked them dry of money. They couldn't fight us on the second war, theoretically, okay? So we took the second, as a result of that, we took the southern part of Myanmar. And then we noticed that the French, through Laos, could attack India through the north of Myanmar. And so we said, let's do it all. So we went and we took the whole of Myanmar. Now, it wasn't a happy ending for anybody, this particular one. Myanmar was, Burma as it was then, was bankrupt. And so was the British economy back in the UK. It cost so much money. Those three wars are the most expensive wars that Britain ever fought. The Anglo-Burmese wars. You can look that up. They were hugely expensive. And they dragged the British economy down with them. And the East India Company, they went down as well. And it ended up with Britain taking India, the state. So it became the Raj. It became part of the state rather than run by the British East India Company. Okay? Myanmar was then administered as a province of India. It was never regarded as a separate country at that particular time. It was regarded as a province of India. The big problem with that was that all the civil service posts, all the government administration posts, the ones that are not reserved for the British, which were the very top ones, were all filled by Indians, okay? At one time, there was over 1 million Indians working in Myanmar, in the civil service, in the army, etc., etc. Huge amount of resentment amongst the Burmese because they couldn't get in, okay? They couldn't get into the civil service, they couldn't get anywhere. So there was a lot of problems, okay, within the country. In the end, oh, one last point. because of the success of rice growing in Rakhine or Arakan, the government decided to start growing rice up all the way up the Irrawaddy. Okay, they were going to turn the centre part here into one huge rice field. So it was going to supply the whole world with rice, basically. The problem is with that, it needed a lot of money. So where did they get the money from? There were no Burmese banks. Because it was part of India, there were no banks actually allowed to operate there. There were Burmese. There were Indian banks that supplied the money. And they had an absolutely stupid rate of interest. And what happened was the farmers went bankrupt. And the Indian banks ended up in charge of all the farms. So again, that was a huge, it caused huge amounts of unrest in the country. In the end, I think it was 1870s, 1880s, something like that, Rose could probably tell me, they split Burma off from India, made it into a separate country, administratively. Okay, so in other words, the Burmese could actually join the civil service, etc., etc. Okay, let's fast forward to the Second World War. As you probably know, Burma was what we call the Forgotten War. The Japanese invaded. They were going to take India. Okay, that's what they wanted to do, and Burma was a stepping stone. Well, Thailand, then Burma, was a stepping stone. Okay, now, at that particular time, the British always regarded Burma as nothing more than a buffer state. Burma was there to protect India, no other reason. Okay, we didn't care about Burma at all, apart from the fact that it was a buffer state. Okay. We didn't find oil, etc., until later on, okay, and they realized. We never developed the country particularly. We turned it into a rice bowl, but that's about it, okay? We never really developed the country from that point of view. Second World War, Japanese invaded, okay. What happened then was the central Burmese, the Burmans, they joined the Japanese. They went on the Japanese side. Okay, under their leader, Aung San. They went to Japan, 30 of them went to Japan. They were called the 30 Comrades. They went to Japan, and Aung San led the delegation. One of the soldiers that was with him was a guy called Ne Win. Okay, now Ne Win became the dictator of Myanmar. Okay, I'll talk about him more in a second. What Aung San was thinking, and what the Japanese had actually promised, was, you help us with the war against the British, throwing the British out, we'll give you your independence. Okay? So they said, fine. So they fought on the side of the British. The Karen, these guys, fought on the, Aung San fought against the British. The Karen fought on the side of the British from day one. Okay? And the quid pro quo was, you fight for us, we'll give you your own state when the war's over. Okay. Okay, so after the Japanese invaded and took the country over, Aung San realized that there was no way the Japanese were ever going to give it up. This was part of the Japanese empire. It was never going to be a separate country. So Aung San changed sides. Okay? Now, I'm not going to get into the whole war thing. What I've done is I've put you a QR code there. That is a link to World at War, which is narrated by Laurence Olivier, about the war in Burma, okay? It gives you the conditions, etc., at that particular time, what it was like, what the fighting was like, who was taking part, etc., etc. The Karen were treated extremely badly by the Japanese because we were fighting against them. More Karen died building the Burma Railway than anybody else. They were put into slave labor, they were comfort girls, you know, forced prostitution, etc., etc. They were treated really, really badly by the Japanese. But they always stuck to the promise. We're going to, when Britain wins, we're going to get our own state, Karenni state. Okay. Okay, come the end of the war, okay, we win, hooray, okay. Okay, so we've got a problem. And the problem is that after the war, it was pretty obvious that Britain was going to lose India, okay? And because we were going to lose India, we had absolutely no reason to keep Burma. Burma was always there as a buffer state, okay, for India. With India gone, there was no need to keep Burma at all. So the Attlee government, the Labour government that took over after the Second World War, wanted to get rid of Burma as soon as possible. There was another reason too. Burma was absolutely crushed by the war. Their economy was wrecked. Everything was wrecked. The whole country was wrecked, okay, after the war. They were in a terrible state. The British government realised that we didn't have the money. We couldn't pay to reconstruct it. So they thought, leave. Best thing to do, leave them to it. Okay, so the Attlee government was all in favour of doing this. Churchill, who was in opposition at that time, was dead against it. He wanted to keep Burma at any cost. Okay, that becomes important later on. One of the problems we had in getting rid of Burma is who do we give it to? We had to have somebody who everybody respected and who could take over the government. And we wanted to do this very quickly, by the way. 47, 48, that was it. We wanted to be out, okay? So we needed everything to be done very, very quickly. The problem is we couldn't talk to the one person who did have a lot of following in Myanmar or in Burma, and that was Aung San. Aung San at that time was actually on our side, as I said, because he realized what the Japanese were up to. But even so, the governor, the British governor of Burma, wanted to hang him, okay? So there's no way they could talk to him, okay? Nobody could talk to him. Anyway, this guy comes along. Now, Tom Dryburgh is an interesting character, okay? He's a communist. He was one of the senior members of the Communist Party in the UK. However, he became a Labour MP. He was very, very well connected within the Labour movement, okay? He also wrote the William Hickey column in the Daily Express, even though him and Beaverbrook hated each other's guts. He also was the person who persuaded Howard Wilson to sell, was it Howard Wilson? It might have been somebody before, it might have been Attlee actually, to sell jet engines to Russia, 6 jet engines to Russia, after he talked to Khrushchev. And those jet engines were copied, put into MiGs, and they were fighting against us in Korea. So it gives you an idea of very interesting guy. He talked to Ho Chi Minh and came up with a supposed solution to Vietnam before, you know, he put forward his ideas. He was one of the reasons that Britain never got involved in the Vietnam War, okay, because we didn't think it was right, okay, what was being done. He also talked to Aung San. Now, this guy, as I said, he was a pretty leading advocate within the Labour Party. However, he was also, at that particular time, he was homosexual, and homosexuality was absolutely forbidden in the UK. And he was caught filleting a Norwegian sailor. There he is. May not be up to date, okay? Well, anyway, somehow, Tom Dryburgh realized that at that particular time, it was not good to be caught for homosexuality in the UK. So he said, I'm off to Burma. I'm going to see how the troops are doing in Burma. So off he went to Burma, leaving the whips to deal with his minor problem, yes. Which they did, in actual fact. And he became friends with the policemen. Not friends, but friends, hello mate, friends with the policeman that actually booked him. He was a very charismatic guy. He was, in a lot of ways, he was good and he was bad. He was curate's egg. He became a special advisor to Mountbatten because Mountbatten didn't have a clue what to do with Burma. And he was the one that actually turned around and said, we should talk to Aung San, okay? And so what the British did, what Mountbatten did, was they got rid of the British governor at that particular time and brought in, who was a military guy who wanted to hang Aung San, and they brought in a more conciliatory guy, Dorman Smith, I think his name was, something like that. And he was going to smooth the waves. Basically, as I said, we wanted to get rid of Burma. We wanted to go. We wanted to leave. We don't want to stay there anymore. So we need to do this in a hurry. So, Aung San, that's him, by the way. That's Aung San. He's the father of Aung San Suu Kyi. Yeah. He was suddenly invited to number 10 Downing Street. In fact, that's a picture of him outside number 10 Downing Street, 1947. And basically, Attlee turned around to him and said, we want you to run Burma. It's going to be your country. Okay? So he was taken aback. He didn't realize this was going to happen. Nobody knew this was going to happen. We want you to have elections. You're very popular, etc., etc. However, we want you to become a dominion of the UK. So we didn't want you to have complete freedom. You were going to be a dominion, the same as Australia, the same as Canada, i.e. the head of state was the king, okay? All the big cases were decided in the High Court in London, okay? Privy councillors could veto any laws, etc. Aung San said, no, we want to be independent, okay? Now, this apparently really, really, really upset Churchill. Like, really upset Churchill. And he was storming around the House of Commons for days, saying, we're giving away all our jewels, etc., etc. He was really furious about it. One of the parts of the deal was that Aung San wanted single country, which included the Karenni state. So the British government said, sod it, the Karens can become part of Burma. The Karens were not very happy about this because of all the losses, etc. they took during the war, the fact that they were very, very loyal during the war. They kicked off. They started a civil war, an uprising in Karenni state, which is, as you remember, all the way down the right-hand side. Okay. A couple of shameful things happened then. Okay, one of them was this guy's called Smith Dunn, and he was the head of the Burmese army at that particular time. He also was Karen, okay? So Tom Dryburgh turned around and said to Mountbatten, he can't be trusted, he's Karen. Now, the guy had earned his spurs fighting the Japanese, so he was extremely loyal. He was extremely loyal to the state as well. But because of this, he was arrested, stripped of his rank, and thrown out the army, okay? So that was very shameful on the part of the British. He was very loyal to the state. If he'd have stayed in, you wouldn't have had this civil war. But we did it. The guy we brought in to replace him was Ne Win. Okay, probably the worst person we could have chosen. Aung San won the election. Landslide. One of the reasons was that Karen boycotted it. They didn't want any part of it. They said, we don't want to be part of this. Okay? On his very, very first cabinet meeting, he was shot. In fact, his whole of his cabinet were assassinated by this guy. This guy was called U Saw. Now, U Saw was conservative, okay? He didn't want to upset the status quo. He didn't want all this nationalism and all the rest of it. He wanted to stay with the British. He was a good friend of Churchill, etc. Lots and lots of evidence points to him as being the ringleader of the assassins. However, there's still a lot of controversy about the assassination because everybody said the British were involved, which they were. But to what extent? Who were the gunmen, for example? Were they British or were they Burmese? We don't know. Okay, we know this guy was behind it, but we don't know who the gunmen actually were. We do know that Britain supplied the weapons. In fact, this guy, David Vivian, Captain David Vivian, he was the fall guy for the British, by the way. He got banged up in Inseam prison. I spelt it wrong, by the way, because I thought insane prison sounds better. He got banged up in Inseam prison, but he got released by the Karen. The Karen stormed the prison and released him, took him to Karen. He lived there for about a year, and then he went to live in the UK, retired to Eastbourne. Okay? There was nearly a problem, and the British didn't want this problem at this particular time. So they installed a guy called U Nu, which was Aung San's deputy. Now, U Nu was... Who knew? No, U Nu. U Nu was nowhere near as strong or as popular. He was a good administrator, but he was nowhere as strong and as popular as Aung San. Aung San was hugely popular. Okay? He would have made a great leader. I mean, superb leader, but there we are. He became a very weak government. Okay? However, it gave us enough of a fig leaf to leave. Okay? We never got dominion. It became a republic. Okay, with a president, etc. It cut off most of the ties with the West because, to be honest, they haven't had a particularly good time from the West. And it was a weak government, and there was still huge uprising in the border area, amongst the Karens. To give you some sort of flavor of how complicated Myanmar is, this is electoral constituencies, but more importantly, ethnic groups. Now, as you can see, these are the Burmans down the middle. Those are the Arakanese. The Chin and the Arakanese, maybe Rose can disagree with me here, can be regarded very similar as a similar state. Is Kachin up there? The saddest state of all, which is Shan, just there. And then the Karens down here. And that particular map is actually a fairly good map of where the war stands at the moment. We're pretty much there. The purple is, I'm going up a little bit, is actually run by the Tatmadaw, the Burmese army, okay? The east is run by various warlords and gangs and drug baron. Oh, God, it's a mess, a real mess. And the west, which I'll come to in a minute, with Arakan and Shin, okay, is being taken by the, I think they call themselves the Arakanese Army. Is that right now? Arakanese Army? The people who are fighting here, I think they call themselves the Arakanese Army. Now, going back a little bit, the Rohingyas were loathed by the Burmese army, okay, the Muslims. They wanted to push them out. However, Bangladesh has a dog in that fight. Remember how small Bangladesh is, how many people they've got? Bangladesh really would like Arakan and Shin, okay? So they're helping, not officially, but they're helping the Arakanese army. The Arakanese army consists of Buddhists and Muslims. At one time they were fighting against each other, now they're fighting together with each other, and they're winning in that particular part of the world, okay? And as I said, I have a feeling that it'll become part of Bangladesh at some point, okay? It's a beautiful area, lots and lots of ports, but there's a there's a very strong geopolitical reason for it, which I'll come to a bit later. Okay, so the Karen still would like Karenni state, which is here. Notice where Thailand is, by the way. Okay. Let's look at the geopolitics. Why here? Why now? Who's behind this? The bottom line is America is behind this. There's very good reasons for it, okay? And the reason is all to do with the fact that America, this is well known in diplomatic circles, America wants to go to war with China within the next 5 years, okay? Because that's a window of opportunity. After 5 years, China will become more powerful militarily than the US, okay? Now the US has done pretty well so far, okay? It runs South Korea, runs Japan, Okinawa's down here, all these islands have got military bases on. Taiwan, Philippines now that Marcos Jr. is in charge. But look where any shipping from China has to go. Has to go down here, round Singapore and through the Straits of Malacca there. For hundreds of years, people wanted to control the Straits of Malacca. The French and the British were always fighting over the Straits of Malacca. It is the biggest trade route for ships coming from the Far East into Europe, into Africa, etc. All go through that one little bottleneck down there. Okay, so let's project ourselves forward. America wants to go to war with China. What are the pretexts? Well, the initial pretext was Taiwan. Taiwan is actually part of China. It's recognized as such by the UN. It's recognized as such by the US State Department. It's on their website, okay? So it's actually part of China. However, the Americans are trying to convince them, you need to be independent, okay? Now, at one time, before the last election, both the legislature and the president, the executive, were both pro-independence, okay? So it looked good. The plan looked good. However, in the last election, the president is pro-independence, the legislator is pro-China. And at the moment, I don't know, 70%, maybe more of their trade is with China. They get all the sand, etc., for their semiconductors from China. They've got huge, I think, even in Hong Kong, they've got about 20% of their trade is with Hong Kong. They've got huge connections with China, okay? They're really stupid to actually do this. Well, anyway, I think the Americans have come into the realization that Taiwan is not the place to go. They had a plan B. Plan B was Korea. So they were Korea was going to attack South Korea. The Americans were going to come in and were going to sweep up through Korea and into China that way. Okay, great plan. Ruined by Vladimir Putin, who came along and said, we're having a military pact with North Korea. If North Korea is attacked, Russia will attack whoever's attacking them with nukes. And not only that, but he gave Kim Jong-un, he gave him missiles, medium-range missiles that are capable of hitting the west coast of the US, Hawaii, and Alaska. Okay, so now they got the missiles, plus the fact he hoisted North Korea's first spy satellite into space, which is now above the White House, by the way. They've stationed it above the White House, God knows why. Okay, so what's the third option? What about this option? Okay, now there is a reason for this. Okay, we can look at the reason for this. As I said, this is where all the trade goes. So what does China need to do to stop all its trade being blocked in the event of a war? Okay, they've got a naval base here, but in comparison with the hundreds, literally 200 odd bases that the US have got, it's nothing. So they need to find a different way of bringing in the goods and shipping the goods, mainly oil. Now, at the moment, their oil route, as you can see, is this, through the Malacca Straits. Now, the Malacca Straits can be closed off very quickly. The British have still got a base in Malaysia, unofficially, but with people in uniform and guns and all the rest of it, but we've actually still got a base in Malaysia. So the Malacca Straits could get closed off. Okay, so the plan A for the Chinese was to get their oil through here, through Thailand. So the oil was going to come ashore here. Oh, okay, I'm skipping ahead of myself. There was going to be a canal built across the Kra Isthmus. Okay, now the idea of the canal was so that shipping could miss Singapore. Singapore was absolutely tamping mad because over 50% of their revenues come from their port. They really did not want that. Okay, so they kicked up a fuss, number one. Okay, the Americans kicked up a fuss as well. Anyway, that idea fell through. Okay, because the oil was going to come through the Kra Canal to Sattahip and to the oil refineries on the south coast, yeah? And then it was going to be shipped north. And there was going to be a high-speed rail coming all the way down here, if you remember. The same one that came through Laos was going to come all the way down here. It was going to connect Don Muang, he was going to connect Suvarnabhumi, and he was going to connect Utapao, okay? So this, and the Eastern Economic Corridor under Thailand 4.0 was created around this whole thing of the high-speed rail, the new container port being built at Sattahip, the oil refineries, okay, at Mataput, and all the rest of it. It was all built around this. Well, anyway, at the moment, it's sort of fallen apart, okay? So there was a lot of dissent about the high-speed rail coming down here. Okay, whether you like the idea or not, you know, it's up to the Thais, really. It's certainly not up to foreigners. So then they talked about bringing the high-speed rail this side, okay, which made more sense in a lot of ways. Okay, so it was going to join up with Kra. Now, Kra now is not going to be a canal. Now it's going to be a high-speed rail line across the country with truck, you know, 6-lane highways, etc. And there was going to be a free port at either side, either end. Okay, so the actual plan is not dead. Okay, it's still going to go ahead. So it made more sense to actually bring the railway down to there. Okay. Now, from China's point of view, it didn't solve anything. Okay, because the oil wasn't coming through Kra and up through Thailand, it didn't solve anything with their oil problem. So they thought, we can do it through Myanmar. Okay, so we can bring our oil into Myanmar, because they've got oil already, okay, and we can ship it straight north, okay. In fact, that's the actual oil and gas pipeline. That's the actual thing itself, okay. So you can see where it goes from. It goes from here all the way up through, Lashio is in Shan State, so this is Shan State, okay, all the way up through the center. It joins up with the Burmese oil and gas fields as well, okay. So as far as the Chinese were concerned, this is a great deal. And this is why we're having a war, okay, exactly this. The Americans wanted to stop this, obviously, because this would have ruined their plans completely, okay. So what happened was the Americans started pumping through the National Enterprise for Democracy, which is, they call it the shadow CIA. Okay, what happens with when a country wants to be, when America wants to color revolution a country, they send in the National Enterprise for Democracy, start lots of quangos, stir up lots of trouble on the street, okay, overthrow the government, and then basically the CIA steps in and takes it from there, okay? So they're the soft part of the CIA. So you always know when
And they run out of the American embassies, by the way, because there's a joke in diplomatic circles, and that is, why is it that America has never had a color revolution? And the answer is because America's the only country in the world without a US embassy, okay? Because the color revolutions are always run out of the US embassy. There's one going on in Venezuela at the moment, there's one going on in Georgia, out of the US embassies, okay? Money was pumped in, and we've got the evidence of it. In fact, I will give you the link to the National Enterprise for Democracy website, and you can look it up. You can go to it yourself, okay, and see it. Okay, around about, was it 2021, there was an election, and the army said that there was irregularities. Now, there's lots of stories about what actually happened. One was that Aung San Suu Kyi's party was, they were unhappy because they're being cut out of the cash stream, okay, and they wanted in on the graft. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. I have no idea. That's one particular story. What we do know is that the Burmese army wanted to be back in control again, okay? The Burmese army did very well out of Myanmar, whereas the rest of Myanmar didn't do very well out of the Burmese army. Ne Win had a coup in 1962, okay, where he took over the country, okay? Martial law, it was nasty. He brought in the Socialist Republic of Myanmar, or of Burma at that particular time, okay? And his slogan, unofficial, was, everything belongs to the state, the army's the state, therefore everything belongs to us, okay? They basically had fingers in every pie in Burma, including drugs. I mean, we're going to come to drugs in a minute, but they had a finger in every pie, okay? Now, the Burmese people did not do well out of this. They still carried on with their program against the Karen, okay? It still carried on. They weren't giving any freedom to anybody. Shan State was being wrecked, okay? Kachin, they couldn't actually do much with Kachin because it was too far out. It was beyond what they could deal with. It was a hell of a mess, hell of a mess. Well, anyway, an environmental activist, can't remember his name, he put himself forward as a candidate in the election, okay, for a garrison town. It was a garrison town of the Tatmadaw, the army. So you could expect, it was like the garrison and then the surrounding town, which is like the Vicus. It supplied all the stuff to the town. Well, this guy had been banged up for 8 years for attacking the army. So the army didn't exactly love this guy. However, he won the election in that particular town. So the army turned around and said, no, this is not on. So they asked the president to annul the elections for 1 week while they investigate it. What happened then was the students kicked off in Yangon, Rangoon. So the street battles going on. But more sinister in a lot of ways was Chinese businesses were being attacked all the way up Burma, okay? But Chinese businessmen were being slaughtered. Okay, so there was obviously some sort of anti-Chinese thing going on. Now the Chinese haven't had a happy relationship in Burma, or should I say Burmese haven't had a happy relationship with the Chinese in Burma. They're not, whereas in Thailand, the Chinese ties are very beneficial to the country. I mean, they brought industry, etc., to the country. In Burma, they brought, sex, slavery, drugs, you name it, to the country, all sorts of scams, okay? So it's quite understandable that the Burmese are not particularly happy towards the Chinese. Okay. what happened then was, in the east of the country, this new group, I can't remember what they call themselves now, joined up with the, I think they're called now the KNU, the Karen National Union. It could be called anything because they keep changing the name all the time. Basically, there was 3 Karen groups. Okay, there's the Karen Nationalists, Karen Communists, and the Karen Buddhists. Okay, they've all joined up now, and they're fighting the Burmese army. Okay, the Tatmadaw. The Tatmadaw are losing. I mean, they're losing badly. For example, you see 2 of the way stations on here that are very important. One of them is Lashio, and the other one is Ann. Okay, those are key places. They have both been taken by the rebels. About a month ago, the Arakanese army took Ann. Okay, Ann is also an extremely important crossroads. Okay, big highway junction there. The Arakan has not been very particularly well developed. Okay, so it's quite difficult terrain to fight in. So you need roads, especially if you've got armor, etc. So taking Ann was really important because it cut off. It's basically cut the Arakan in 2. Lashio was completely different. Lashio was a divisional headquarters. Okay. Not only did the army take it, the KNU take it, they also captured the generals in charge and all the ammunition, etc. Oh, and yesterday they captured, it's up here, they captured the Arakanese army has captured the capital of Chin province over there. So they're winning there. Okay, so that's the state of play at the moment. To give you an idea of what the Tatmadaw have ended up as, there used to be the all-conquering army, really tough, really strong, think Gurkhas. Not anymore. Not anymore. They're a ragtag army. They've sucked so much money out of the economy. They spent so much time looting the economy that they forgot what they were there for, and that was to protect the country. Okay, so they let the Tatmadaw go to rack and ruin. These are a couple of the soldiers from Lashio, okay, which is a few days ago. They don't exactly look motivated to me, I'm sorry, but I mean, they look pretty beaten down. This came from CNN, by the way. This particular screenshot came from CNN. However, I have put a link there to a newspaper called the Irrawaddy, and it's well worth going there because they'll give you the latest information about what's happening in Burma. Okay. Now, I said I was going to, I don't want to make this too long, so I'll start winding down. One of the things I said, well, I was going to give you some proof. So there's the National Enterprise for Democracy website. Now, they always publish the details about 2 or 3 years in arrears. But this gives you a snapshot of the sort of things that were happening around that time, what they were actually paying for with the National Enterprise for Democracy. I've given you the QR link there so you can actually go on their website and have a look. How are the arms getting there? Okay, because the fighting has moved from the north down towards the center now, down towards the Thai border. Okay, in fact, the latest fighting is at Chayawadi, which is just over the border from Mae Sot. Okay, the Karen National Army said they took it, and then they said they hadn't taken it. Okay, so, but I'll cover that in a second. So they're getting arms from somewhere. Now, who's supplying the arms for the Burmese army? Russia. Last year they supplied $500 million worth of arms to the Burmese army. and China. China's supplied $250 million worth of arms to the Burmese army. Russia is doing it because they've got oil interests in the area. The Chinese are doing it because of the pipeline and access. If America takes over Burma or Myanmar, then that will be the pathway to war through Myanmar, okay? And Thailand will get dragged into it, 100%. So it's dangerous at the moment. So it's pretty obvious that the Americans are supplying the weapons. But how? How? This man may be the clue. Sorchit too. Now do you know him? He's Karen. However, he also fights for the Burmese army. He fights for anybody, really. Well, actually, he fights for himself. He's supposedly, at the moment, on the side of the Karen, okay? However, he did get an Outstanding Achievement Award from the Tatmadaw for his excellent achievements against the Karen. So who knows where he is? However, what we do know is that he is just the other side of the river of Mae Sot, okay, in Chayawadi. And he's the local regional warlord. Now, he turned around and he's seen, and this guy knows which way the wind's blowing. He's seen the way things are going, and he said, I don't want any more arms from, because the Tatmadaw was supplying all the arms for him. We don't want any more from the Tatmadaw, okay? We're okay, we don't want any more. Now, there's no way he's going to do that unless he's got an arms supply. So where would an arms supply go? What would you need for an arms supply? Neutral country, maybe? Okay. Airport? Yeah, you've got to have an airport to bring them in. Good road link between the airport of the neutral country and the target country. Where could that be? What about Mae Sot? Mae Sot has got an international airport with no international flights, apart from high-rolling gamblers coming in from China and Macau and Hong Kong and places like that, okay? Where do they go? They go to the 17 casinos that this guy runs in Myanmar, okay? Now, this guy has just popped to prominence in the last couple of weeks ago because he's been sanctioned by the UK government for human trafficking, okay? He has got, he runs a lot of the call centers things that are going on there, okay, across the border. Him and another guy, and the other guy is Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping is now banged up in Bangkok Hilton. The Thais caught him on the border. But he was by far and away the biggest gangster in the Far East, really. I mean, he was Chinese, and he ran scams in just about every country in the Far East, okay? And he ended up in Myanmar, and he teamed up with this dude, and they opened the village at Shui Koko Miang. Is that right? Okay, which again is in Myanmar, and that's where all of the compounds are with all these slaves in, and they are slaves as well, from all over the world. 300 guys from Uganda were rescued. Uganda, what are they doing there? Okay, so they're bringing people in. They're saying, you know, here's a well-paid job. You can come and, you know, join us. And then they're basically locked up in these call centers, not allowed out. You've got to make so many hits, etc. I suspect, but I don't know, that the arms are coming in through him. Okay, across from Mae Sot Airport, across the Friendship Bridge, into Myanmar. Just a thought. One last thing about this guy. He said, because the Burmese National Union Army said that they took Chayawadi. He said, no, they haven't, because it's mine. Okay? He said, I'll allow them to take it when I allow them to take it. At the moment, he's making too much money. Okay, you don't want to give it up. And so basically, he's hanging on. But where would they get the money from? I mean, the US is not known. When it's a proxy war like this, which is low level, simmering proxy war that nobody knows is a proxy war, because let's face it, this is Russia, well, China and America at war, effectively, through Burma, okay? And Americans don't tend to spend that much money on a proxy war, not at this early stage. So where does the money coming from for the rebel side, especially on the east in Shan State? The Golden Triangle. Oh, this is where Rose comes in. This is her state. The Golden Triangle is nowhere near that big, okay? It's basically there, Shan State. Okay, what's the history of this? The history of this was, during the communist takeover of China, the Kuomintang army, Chiang Kai-shek's army, was split into three, okay? The people on the eastern side went to Taiwan. They took all the national treasures. It took them 2 years, by the way, to transport all the national treasures out of China into Taiwan, and they've been sitting in caves in Taiwan ever since. The southern group were captured by the Chinese, and they were told, you can rehabilitate yourself by going to Korea and fighting the Americans. And so that's where the barefoot army came from. You know, the ones in the straw sandals and the pajamas, they were the Kuomintang army, okay? Mao said at the time, he says, great, a win-win situation for me. I get rid of the trouble, and they also caused trouble for the Americans. That war, by the way, only stopped because Truman threatened to bomb China, nuke China. The third lot went west, and they ended up in Shan State, here, on the border. Now, the Americans liked the idea of having a dissident army against the Chinese on the border, fully equipped, fully trained. The CIA, it was an OSS operation first, but then when the OSS was disbanded after the Second World War, the CIA took the operation over. However, they needed money. So what did they do? There was a very small opium trade up there at that time. It was very small. Mainly they were supplying sick people, because it's a good analgesic, and also tourists, because tourists were going up there and they were trying the opium experience. But it was very, very small. What the Americans decided to do was ramp up the production of opium and flood the Chinese market with opium, okay? The Chinese took a pretty dim view of that, okay? So they were fighting back. Now, opium is very easy to detect. Dogs can detect it very easily. So what we needed was a version of refined opium. And a version of refined opium is heroin. And so they taught the people up there, the KMT, how to make heroin. And they were supplying heroin. However, the Chinese were very successful about pushing this back. Now, I don't know where the Chinese and the Mexican drug cartels got the idea from of putting drug labs all along the border of their enemy came from. It's a head scratcher, that one. What happened then was the drugs came south. In fact, this was the main distribution center for the drugs for up there. It did not do well for Thailand. Thailand did not do well out of this, okay? However, the guy in charge, by the way, of 80% of the drugs was a guy called Kun Sa. Kun Sa was Chinese. You know Kun Sa? And he at one time, he controlled 80% of the heroin and opium trade in the world. I mean, he was a pretty big dude. Obviously, everybody was chasing him. He lived in Thailand. He lived in the north of Thailand, okay? At one time, the DEA rattled the cage of the Thai army and said, you've got to go and grab this guy. So they sent us the rangers up there, the Thai rangers up there, to collect him, and they all got killed. And so they said, nah, maybe not. Now, he built hospitals, he built schools, he built clinics, he built roads. He was very well liked in that area, yes? He was a philanthropist, but he was making a ton of money. He had his own army. Some people say it was 10,000, some people say it was 20,000. He distributed the heroin via the KMT, the Kuomintang Army, who was still very well connected across the Asia. Where America came in was in Vietnam, because the American GIs found the heroin relieves the stress of fighting in a jungle, which is pretty nasty. And heroin was being shipped back to the US in the coffins of dead Marines, okay? And that's where the heroin problem really started in the US in a big way, was after Vietnam. And it all came from here. This was, or I say here, from what they call the Golden Triangle. Bottom line is they've got a ton of money, and they are incredibly well equipped. Most of their equipment comes from Laos. The Laotian army just sold it to them. They've got attack helicopters, they've got tanks, they've got armored cars, they're incredibly well equipped. And they're run by the CIA, okay? Now, Kun Sa at the end turned around to the Americans for a start and said, look, I tell you what, give me $150 million. I want to retire. Give me $150 million. You can have my trade. And the Americans said, no, we're not going to do that. Okay, we don't do deals with drug dealers. We're going to wipe you out. Oh, well, fair enough. So he went to the Australians and said, look, we'll supply you with all of our opium legally for $50 million a year, okay? And you can turn it into morphine or whatever, because opium is the best analgesic, yeah? And the Australian government said, no, we're not going to deal with drugs. So he said, fair enough. He handed it over to the Burmese army. The Burmese army had always had a hand in that particular pie. In fact, they had a company set up called MOGE, or M-O-G-E, okay, Myanmar Oil and Gas Enterprises. Two prestigious shareholders. One of them was ELF, which is French, and the other one was Total, which is French. I think Total put 15 million in, and ELF put 5 million in, something like that. He never traded. It didn't have any assets. It didn't have anything. However, it was backed by two big oil companies, therefore it's completely kosher. In its first year, with no employees, nothing, it turned over $150 million, okay? Which is pretty damn good. I'm thinking, I should be in this business. $150 million in the first year without doing a damn thing. What was it? It was the drugs money being laundered through that company. In fact, Myanmar banks are quite well known around the world now. They will launder your money. If you've got any dirty money, Myanmar banks will launder it for you. It's 40, but it costs you 40%, okay? But you can go over there and you can get your money laundered if you really wanted it, okay? So the government, the army's been involved very heavily, which is why nothing has ever happened up there, okay? What did happen was the DEA broke the link between the KMT and Kun Sa, and that stopped the shipment, and then Afghanistan became the big supplier. But now Shan State is coming back. It's now the biggest opium producer again in the world. So that's where the money's coming from. Okay, I've nearly finished. So, what's going to happen in Myanmar? I'd like to see it as a federation, to be quite honest. I'd like to see the Tatmadaw beaten and to have a proper treaty between all the parts of Myanmar and then make it a federation with a president, etc. Failing that, I can see it splitting into 3 or 4. Shan State will become its own state, maybe with Kachin together. Karenni State will become its own state. And remember, they go all the way down into the Andaman Islands. The core, the middle bit of Burma, will remain Burmese. And the left-hand side, Chin State and the Arakan, will probably end up, initially they will be independent, but eventually they'll end up as part of Bangladesh. That's how I see it, okay? But I'd really like to see it as a federation. I really would. A peace, at last, after 200 years. Okay. Thank you.
I am amazed at how you got through that whole history without mentioning Aung San Suu Kyi. What was her role in all of this?
Aung San Suu Kyi was, I mean, basically she got in on the basis of her father, yeah. Her role in this at this particular time, she was the darling of the West, okay? Everybody loved Aung San Suu Kyi until she said, remember, she was a nationalist. Her father was a nationalist, she was a nationalist. She sent the army in to push the Rohingyas out of Burma. And at that particular time, where, you know, all the fuss about the Rohingyas on boats and all the rest of it, she went down in everybody's estimation. Now, the story I heard is she's under house arrest at the moment. And the reason she's under house arrest is because they fear that she'll be assassinated, not by the army, but by the other lot. Because she's no longer loved by the West, she's a target, and a perfect target. If she's shot, they can blame the army. Okay, so the army's protecting her. That's the story I've heard. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. Aung San Suu Kyi cannot become the president. Okay, they passed a law to say that because her husband is, or was, British, and her kids are British, she cannot become the president because she's got close foreign relations. Okay, so she had a special I don't know what position created for it, but she was the prime minister to all intents and purposes. I think, to be quite honest, she's out of the equation now. I don't think anybody on any side particularly trusts her anymore. Unfortunately, I think she's a lovely lady, but it's unfortunate. But she played the nationalist card, and as far as the West was concerned, that was it.